Hi guys, so tonight we said that we would talk a little bit about how trauma affects us physically on a physical level, like what actually physically happens in our body when we have a traumatic event happen to us. And like we said last time, trauma is all perceived. So what may affect one person will not affect another person in the same way, and they may not perceive it as equally as traumatic. So if you do perceive something as trauma, what happens in your body is you have a threat that occurs. Your amygdala, which is a section in your brain that helps with processing, it causes an alarm that then goes to the thalamus. It sends a signal to the brain stem. And then your body is going to release some norepinephrine. Your sympathetic or your stimulating nervous system will send signals to your organs and muscles to get them ready for fight. And your sympathetic nervous system is the one that we talk about as the fight or flight. That's the sympathetic nervous system, and that's why it releases those chemicals to get you ready to fight if you need to. Your hypothalamus tells your pituitary gland to signal your adrenal glands, which are those little tiny glands that sit on top of each of your kidneys that are very important to support their health, by the way. Anyway, they start releasing adrenaline or epinephrine, if you will, and cortisol. And adrenaline or epinephrine and cortisol are both stress hormones. So now you have these adrenal glands that on top of your kidneys that are now releasing stress hormones in your body because you're in the midst of a traumatic event. It's usually like a life and death thing or perceived to be a life and death type of thing. So epinephrine increases your heart rate to get blood to move more quickly throughout your body if need be. It dilates your pupils. Your pupils expand and dilate and get really big so that you can take in more light and better assess or visualize the situation. Norepinephrine starts to shunt blood to your major muscle groups so that if you need to physically fight or run, you can do so. Your bronchioles in your lungs dilate for increased gas exchange so that you can run faster. You have more oxygen coming in and more oxygen that you're using. So then you can run faster, you can hit harder. The adrenaline also accounts for like not feeling the pain. Like if you get stabbed or shot or hit or whatever, you initially don't feel that pain as dramatically. Cortisol starts to suppress your immune system to reduce inflammation from wounds, and it revs up your stress reactions by causing your brainstem to stimulate the amygdala, which leads to even more cortisol. So what we have going on here is your body saying, I'm anticipating some type of wound. I'm going to shut down the immune system because I don't want a lot of inflammation. Your body's going to works hard to send those histamines and those white cells to fight infection and wounds and that thing. So it kind of shuts that down temporarily. So there's no breaks for this amygdala portion of the brain. There's nothing. Everything is saying go, 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 fight or flight, basically. Everything is on. You're ready. And these are all the little things that happen in your body every single time you perceive something to be traumatic or a threat to you, which are normal. So your reproduction, your digestion are sidelined, your salivation, your digestion slow. It's not necessary. It's not crucial. So your body's not going to support that function at that moment. So women that have fertility problems, ovulation problems, men that have issues such as cystitis, proctitis, those types of things. This is from you can get this from chronic shutdown of those systems. You're sidelining that. A lot of digestive issues are from chronic stress or chronic threats for traumas being perceived because you're consistently sort of sidelining or going around that system and not utilizing it, not using it functionally. Emotions intensify. Your amygdala is hardwired for negativity, negative information, and your ability to react intensely to it. That's just how we are. That's just how we're wired from birth. It goes back to the caveman days where everything was a threat pretty much that you take in. And like I said, like we talked about last time, you're kind of always scanning information and you're always trying to find the negative in things. And that can lead to chronic depression. And that's why you have to work so hard sometimes. Initially, I'll say it's hard. after you kind of get into the habit. It's not difficult. But initially, you have to work hard to overcome all those negative emotions because that is kind of how you're hardwired or you're pre-wired for that. So you have to work really hard to say, okay, no, this isn't a threat, or make a gratitude list, or become thankful, or become grounded in the moment, or present in the moment, to kind of shut down that habit of negative thinking. So you start to feel stressed, you feel angered, your limbic system, your endocrine systems are activated, your control over your prefrontal cortex, which has a lot to do with emotional regulation, declines. So it's kind of like being in a car where there's no brake and you're going down a hill. So you have this chronic low-level background stress constantly running. So a lot of people that have been through significant trauma, especially some type of physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, you kind of have this like chronic low-level negativity and trauma and stress running in the background all the time, just all the time. And by getting triggered and re-traumatized and re-triggered and not ever fully processing or dealing with things, this program is kind of like on in the background. It's kind of like when you start your computer, you have like, like the list of programs that starts at startup or only during, whenever you manually turn it on. This is one of those ones that every time you turn your computer on or every time you wake up, it's just on in the background, whether you want it to be or not. The only way to get rid of that is to basically talk about it, process it in a healthy, functional way that works for you, whether that's with a therapist or in a group or with a friend or through movement therapy or whatever that looks like for you. That's why I always encourage you to find what works best for you and then go with that. So our amygdala also helps us form what we call implicit memories. So these are traces of past memories that exist beneath the surface. So for instance, like when you come to a stop sign, you're going to have to stop, or you see a stop sign, you know that you're going to have to stop. It's an implicit memory. It's just below the surface. Or when you get up and hold your toothbrush, you know that you're going to then brush your teeth. It's just an implicit memory. It's something that's implied that's going to go on, even though you may not have the exact memory of every single second of the motion of last time you brushed your teeth. You have this memory of, oh, okay, this is what I do with this object. So if it's sensitized, it starts to shade those things with fear and negativity because, like I said, that's what we're hardwired for, is negativity. And this turns into chronic anxiety, and it can be low level, but it can be high level anxiety too. So it just kind of depends on the person and the amount of trauma or experiences that they've had. So painful experiences can become recorded in our implicit memory. So this can lead to distortion. So, like if you have, like when you're in high school and you have like a bad boyfriend and a bad breakup, you're like, oh, all men, it's not all men or all women for that matter. It's not all people that are like that. You have to remember that that was specific to that person and that event, and not shade everything with that, so to speak, and not, for lack of a better term, punish or penalize everything in your present or your future just because of you had this one incident, this one time with this that happened or occurred in this one way. So stress reduces serotonin, and serotonin is the neurotransmitter that's found in our gut, most of it, that puts us in a good mood. And remember, if we have this chronic low-level stress going on in the background, our digestion gets sidelined. So that part gets kind of shut down, and it's not much attention gets paid to it. So if you're constantly shutting this down, you're not producing enough serotonin to make you feel good, keep you in that happy mood, so to speak. So your mind gets built from these implicit memories and these experiences of what it feels like to be you. So we talked last time about chronic depression and how your brain has like the ligands actually become sensitized to negative thoughts, and they will start to repel the positive thoughts. And that's what happens with chronic depression, and how sometimes you need help getting past that, whether that's going to therapy or taking an antidepressant short term or whatever that looks like for you. You need help to get over that initial hump, if you will. So positive experiences is how we turn this around and balance it out, so to speak. So companionship helps drive the brain's activity. I know that a lot of times with people that have been assaulted or abused, we don't trust people, we don't like people, we don't want to be around people. And there's a difference in protecting your energy and staying in your own bubble, so to speak, to sort of rejuvenate and nourish yourself versus just not trusting anyone ever. It's important to have, you don't have to have 50 good friends, but if you have one or two, that's obviously very important to your mental health. That's important to the longevity of your physical health as well. There's an interesting study called the Blue Zones. I think it's a TED Talk or something, but you can Google it. But it talks about how in certain zones, the blue zones, people live to be over 100. And one of the factors that contributes to that is companionship over a lifetime, friendship, if you will. So I get a lot of questions too about what is tonic immobility, or why did I freeze when that happened, or this thing occurred and I just froze, I didn't know what to do. And I just want you to know that freezing, or the term tonic immobility, is a very normal response to a traumatic event. So when you can't defend or protect yourself by ducking or dodging or twisting or retracting or anything of that nature, your actions are ineffective, and you know that. Your body knows that, probably more than you do. But when that happens, you freeze or you collapse. And that's a very normal reaction. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't imply anything. It's just a normal physiological reaction to being in a traumatic situation that you perceive as a serious threat to your life and your well-being. And whether that's your physical life or your mental life. So some people say, oh, well, rape's not necessarily life and death. Well, mentally it can be, emotionally it can be. You can be a very different person before and after, obviously. So when your body perceives that, your body will shut down, and that's a very normal response. So there's nothing that you can do to change that, or that you should have done differently. That's just your body's response to it. So if an organism, any organism, perceives any type of mortal danger, like little or no chance of escape, the biological response is paralysis and shutdown, which is tonic immobility, which is freezing, so to speak. And women tend to freeze, and that's just more common in women. And men tend to have a higher adrenal response, which is that fight or flight, that aggression, so to speak. So that's just differences in genders. So our active responses are not likely to be effective in escaping or removing the source of threat. You're not really living, but you're not really dying. Your body knows this. So it's like, we're just going to shut down, totally shut down. So in the wild and nature, immobility serves 4 important survival functions in most mammals. So the first is that it's a last-ditch survival strategy. Playing possum, sometimes the predators won't have the urge to mess with an animal that they think is already dead, so to speak. It'll reduce their urge to harm or to kill. The second one is it affords a degree of invisibility. So if you're lying there still, perhaps that you won't be noticed to an extent. The third one is it promotes group survival. So going back to mammals in the wild and nature and that herd mentality, it serves as a distraction to the predator from the rest of the group. They're like, oh, this thing. So, and the fourth one is that it helps trigger a state of numbing, more so than normal. So extreme pain and terror become very dulled, and it makes the unbearable bearable. You guys have heard of dissociation. This is where dissociation takes place. And like I said, it's very pertinent to your mental health sometimes, which is why your body will just shut down, because it will allow you to dissociate. A lot of people say they felt like they were outside of their body, or they were watching from above, or they went someplace else and they don't remember the event that occurred. All very normal things to happen. And those are the 4 main reasons why immobility is important sometimes during a trauma. So all of these can lead to physical symptoms. So you can get this chronic shutdown. Like last time we talked a little bit about shutting down certain parts of your body, whether it's mentally, emotionally, physically, sexually, whatever that is, and just going through the motions, that you're not really present in your body when those things are happening. That can be a side effect of that. You can get depression, numbness, inflammation. Like I said, a lot of this constant fight or flight that's going on. Just because we had this trauma occur and we haven't processed it yet doesn't mean that it's just kind of gone from our body and like, oh, okay, this is a mental thing I need to work on. Yes, but the mental directly affects the physical. So a lot of things that come into play with that, a lot of them are digestive things. So things like ulcers, colitis, IBS, Crohn's, frequent colds and flus. Remember, because your immune system is being reduced so that your body can be ready to fight this stress. So frequent colds and flus come into play here. Slow wound healing, you can be vulnerable to serious infections, hardening of the arteries, heart attacks, because you're shutting down flow to certain areas, you're not getting adequate flow. Um, Diabetes, which we now know is, or we've known, just the mass medical community has finally accepted it as a inflammatory disease. So we get this chronic low-level inflammation going on all the time in our body from this low-level stress background all the time in our body, leads to things such as diabetes, which is an inflammatory condition, basically. Severe PMS problems, like I mentioned, interstitial cystitis, which if any of you have, you're more than welcome to email me. I have a whole list of things that I did that helped me with that. And proctitis and interstitial cystitis are same coin, just different sides, one for men, one for women. And basically it's chronic inflammation of the bladder, the lining of the bladder wall. So it feels like you constantly have a UTI, which is like ridiculous. But there are things that you can do that can help that. I'm happy to say. So there's all sorts of things that can lead to this, all these physical effects of our body. And I think the biggest proof we have now is the ACE studies, or the Adverse Childhood Events Studies, ACE. If you don't know what they are, Google them. It was a study that kind of accidentally discovered that childhood traumas can lead to chronic disease in like your 20s and 30s. These are the people that are dropping dead at 30 and 40 of a heart attack, that have diabetes, type 2 diabetes at 20, that have like chronic depression, mental, all of these things. But anyway, Google ACE studies, ACE studies. It's amazing. It's now been handed over to the CDC, and they're following people long term over the longevity of their lifetime. It's a really, really great study that can tell us a lot about why it's important to process our trauma, so to speak. So trauma arises, we talked last time about how in Buddhism they believe that all suffering is created by the mind, which is bittersweet, because on the one hand you're like, oh, well, if it's created by the mind, then it can be liberated by the mind. But it's also like, damn, it's liberated by the mind. Okay, what do I know about that? So it's bittersweet. So you have to dig deep a little bit. Trauma arises when our immobility responses do not resolve. We can't make a transition back to normal life. We can't trust people. We can't trust ourselves. We don't like to be touched. We don't, any plethora of things. We're not transitioning back to normal. So for instance, like a deer or an animal gets hit, they collapse, they have that freeze response. You might see them shake a little bit, which we talked about last time is our body's normal energetic response. The shaking kind of shakes off the excess energy. Then they get up and they go back about their day, because for them, shaking and getting rid of the excess energy or the traumatic energy kind of helps them transition back to normal. We don't do that as human beings. We're the only, because we just don't. So the immobility reaction is coupled with fear and other intense negative emotions like dread, revulsion, helplessness. We get this a lot in our relationships, right? Because our relationships, not just with a significant other or romantic, but our friendships, our family relationships, our coworker relationships, our neighbor relationships, they're all a reflection of ourselves and what we're working on internally in our relationship with ourselves. So that's the first thing, is you have to define your relationship with yourself. And if you don't know what that is, look around, because all your relationships around you are a direct reflection of that. So if you don't have friends and you don't like people and people don't like you and you're always having conflict, it's because you're having conflict with yourself and you don't like yourself. So you have to start with yourself and resolve that first before that can manifest outward for you. Don't expect everything outside of you to change. You have to change within first. That's first and foremost, most important. So after we get this coupling with this dread and this revulsion and this immobility, So physical sensations themselves start to evoke fear. So sometimes a touch or a smell, things like that will start to evoke that whole trauma process again. And like we talked about last time, sometimes a scent or a song or someone's voice can sort of re-trigger that traumatic event memory with us. The individual can become conditioned to be fearful of their own internal physical sensations that generate fear. So sometimes if you feel that can re-trigger you or traumatize you, then you become fearful of yourself. And what you don't want to get is isolated and completely triggered all the time by yourself. That's just craziness. So no one wants to live like that. That's not a life. That's not happiness at all. In South America, they call this susto, S-U-S-T-O. And basically what it is fright paralysis and soul loss. So they believe that when you're having a traumatic event and you're like scared to death, frightened to death, you have paralysis, that part of your soul leaves and goes somewhere else so that it doesn't have to experience the trauma. And they believe in calling that back in. So it's a South American Indian practice. It's really kind of cool. So how does trauma relate to shame and guilt, and how is that intertwined? They're very closely related because we have a trauma, and a lot of times we feel like we're to blame, we're at fault, because hindsight's 20/20, right? Oh, you should have done this, you could have done that, you should have seen the signs, you shouldn't have gone down the alley, you shouldn't have talked to that person, you shouldn't have continued that relationship, blah blah blah, etc., etc. It doesn't matter. The fact is, it happened. The fact is, we didn't see the signs because we didn't see the signs, or we did what we did because we didn't listen to our intuition. Can't change that. The fact of the matter is, it happened. And so sometimes when we look back on things, we feel ashamed because, we weren't able to get ourselves out of that situation, so to speak. So self-blame, self-hatred become common. We start to judge ourselves as weak or helpless. We get that collapse of the shoulders. You guys know those people that walk around with their shoulders and their head down. They don't like to make eye contact when they talk to you. That's self-blame, self-hatred, shame, guilt. A lot of times people believe that because this happened, they cause or they deserve misfortune. They get a general sense of badness about themselves. Well, this happened, and it is what it is, and bad things just happen to me, and I guess I deserve that because I didn't stop this from happening, or I didn't change the situation and this bad thing happened. That's garbage, really. So coming out of this state of immobility, when you start coming out of it, and before we talk about that, so what are some things you can do to come out of it? So diaphragmatic breathing, belly breathing. So if you put your hands on your belly, and when you inhale, your belly expands, and when you exhale, your belly goes in. So kind of like you can start this by laying on your back in bed or on the couch or on the floor or wherever. Put your hands on your belly. When you inhale, I want you to inflate your abdomen, push your hand away, and then when you exhale, your belly button meets your spine. So diaphragmatic breathing. We start this as babies, and right around the age of like 7, 8, 9 years old, we learn what stress is, and then we switch and we start to do the shallow chest breathing, and we get away from diaphragmatic breathing, which is actually, diaphragmatic breathing is actually much more effective exchange of oxygen for your body anyway, so FYI. It's also really good for reducing anxiety too. So we'll do a whole breathing technique video at some point, but I love breathing techniques. They're phenomenal. Progressive relaxation is another one. So start at your feet. Relax your toes, relax your ankles, relax your calves, relax your knees. Just start at one part of your body and progressively move up or down. You can start at your head, go to your ears, your neck, your chest, your back, your shoulders, your arms, your fingers. Just progressive relaxation. And it doesn't have to be some big thing. My favorite one that I started with was like imagining like getting into like a tub of warm water, like a hot tub. So first your toes, and then the arch of your foot, and then the heel, and then your ankle. And now you're ankle deep in water. Now both your feet are relaxed. And then you go in a little bit further, and it comes up your calves and around your knees and around your thighs. And now your lower legs are relaxed. So just something quick and simple like that. That's a great way to start to come out of that tonic immobility, that chronic stress stage. Big exhale. So a lot of people are like, oh, you sigh all the time. Well, you know what? Sighing's actually good for you. It activates your parasympathetic nervous system. And your parasympathetic nervous system is your rest and digest, or the one that soothes the sympathetic, all that adrenaline and epinephrine. It's the opposite of that. So it soothes all of that. So the big, sometimes it just feels good to just sigh. And there's nothing wrong with that, as long as you're doing it for that purpose. Touching your lips. Your lips have tons of parasympathetic nervous system fibers in it, and sometimes just touching your lips can kind of like ground you in the moment and bring you present, back into the moment. Mindfulness, imagery, meditation. Meditation, I'm sure everyone knows about, is amazing, and there's tons and tons of videos and books and everything on meditation. I love meditation and breathing techniques. Those are my top two go-to things besides yoga. Imagery is helpful because it will help activate the right hemisphere of your brain, and it will help quiet that internal chatter that we get. You know, that little voice in your head that like never shuts up? Guided imagery will do that. Guided imagery can be as simple as remembering your favorite place to sleep, or your bedroom, or your favorite meal in great detail. It's remembering something, or projecting an image of something, like your ideal day, your ideal hour, like whatever that looks like for you. And make sure that you include all 5 senses in it. That's guided imagery, so to speak. Meditation increases your gray matter and improves your attention. It helps quiet your mind, and it increases activation in the left frontal region, which can help increase your mood and decrease cortisol, and in turn will strengthen your immune system. So it's actually good for you. So those are some things that you can do besides just grounding in the moment. But so what happens when you come out of this, when you're doing these activities, these techniques to kind of come out of it, so to speak? You start to feel a lot of rage, a lot of anger. You're really pissed. And that's normal. It's supposed to. It's not a problem. When you get flooded with rage, the frontal part of your brain starts to shut down, and you are unable to stand back and observe your emotions, because now you become your emotions. Rage can be overwhelming. It can cause panic. It can stifle impulses, primitive impulses, and that can prevent an exit from the immobility. You can get so angry at the other person that you can't even see straight. You know, we talk about seeing red. You're so angry you see red. That's an actual literal thing. You actually see red because that is registered in our brain. So you kind of shut everything out that's helpful, so to speak. So you keep repeatedly frightening yourself. You prevent the response from ever fully completing itself and resolving, and then you just put yourself in the same high-risk situation. So you maintain this state of suppression, so to speak. So you want to come out of the immobility. You do some of the techniques, the breathing, the imagery, the mindfulness, the meditation, whatever that is for you, and you start to feel really angry. And when you get really angry, you start to push that down because it gets to be overwhelming. So what happens is you don't ever really fully express or fully expend that energy and that getting it out of your system, so to speak. So you just push it back down. And you get into this cycle. So you keep repeatedly frightening yourself. So bringing this up, you keep putting yourself in these high-risk situations, in the same relationships, in the same jobs, with the same people, doing the same things over and over again, in the same environment over and over again, to sort of re-traumatize yourself, which we talked about last time. One of the ways or reasons that we do that is to sort of try and fix it or do better this time. But you're not really fully expressing that. You're not having a complete emotional response to that. And it's causing you to just kind of keep it that chronic low level because we don't want to go there. It's too much. So that's why I recommend that you get involved with someone, either a friend that you can trust or a therapist, a good therapist, or a group, something of that nature to help you kind of work through those emotions, so to speak. So all of that is basically, in a nutshell, how it affects us. Rage usually turns into self-hatred, which can turn into depression and self-harm. So when you're constantly suppressing emotions, it's exhausting. It's physically, mentally, and emotionally exhausting. And all you're doing when you suppress that is you start to bring it up and you're like, oh, hey, I'm going to sort of process this. And then you get overwhelmed and then you push it back down. So you don't really resolve anything. You have that chronic low-level stress going on in the background again. So it requires a large amount of energy to suppress that. I had one of my patients one time who had a lot of anger toward their father. and we were out on a walk. We were out hiking. And so to kind of demonstrate this, I had him carry like all these water bottles, all this stuff in his hand, and it's like, and I'm like, oh, hey, now that you have all that, that's all that anger and hatred and resentment you have towards your father. Hey, I have some fresh water for you. This is love. This is acceptance, unconditional love. This is a healthy relationship. Can you hold on to this? And because his hands were so full, he's like, no. I'm like, yeah, because you're expending all your energy to hold on to all this stuff. You have to let some of that go so that you can reach out and take the good that comes into your life too. It's just part of the equation. So yeah, just take that with a grain of salt, if you will. It's confusing, especially if the abuse occurred from a family member, especially for children. It's a whole different layer of extra stuff to process. Yay! But it's especially difficult because as children, especially little children, that's usually the caretaker or the person that we entrust with our life and our they ensure that we live, basically. They ensure that we have shelter and food and that we're safe. And if they're violating that trust or doing a quid pro quo type of thing, like, oh, well, if you do this for me and don't say anything, then I'll let you eat or I'll give you a candy, whatever it is. That's very confusing for a child, especially as a child is not as emotionally or mentally developed as an adult. It's very, very difficult to process. And that really insidiously filters into all your other relationships as you age and mature. And that's why it's so important to work on this stuff now, because if not, you're going to be repeating those same things over and over and over again as an adult that got locked in to life as a child, basically. So we start to realize that there's no safety, there's no goodness. People can't be trusted. We don't trust them. And we just don't like people. So we don't have anything to do with them, so to speak. So, yeah. So anyway, that's basically it in a nutshell of how trauma affects you physically. I think I covered all of the topics that I said we would cover. We talked about repeating patterns in our lives. We talked about shifting and processing emotions with the breathing, the imagery, and the meditation, the importance of our social relationships and having good friends. And I can say as a woman, it has taken me over 30 years to find good female friends that I trust. And that's so important that you have that. Not these like superficial petty things, but just deep relationships that you can talk about really deep subjects with. It's very important in life. We talked about how shame and trauma are intertwined. We talked about tonic immobility. We talked about dissociation, our nervous system. Yeah. I don't know. What else am I missing? Do you guys have questions? Feel free to send them to me. And like I said, if anyone has any questions about the interstitial cystitis, feel free to message me. I have another website and stuff that I will be happy to send you to and tell you what helped me. Maybe I'll do a little thing on that sometime because I know that's a big, big thing with sexual assault and rape, especially in women and men, not more so women, but men as well. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me or post comments. I'm happy to respond. You can find me on Instagram under Angie Marler Yoga, or you can find me on the website, angiemarler.com. Thanks for joining me, and we'll check in next month. Have a good night.